Welcome to the Wisconsin Podcast. I'm Craig Sauer. On this podcast, we talk Wisconsin things, everything from media, sports, culture, nature, politics, and more. Today, I talked to the beer baron, Chris Drosner. Drosner writes about beer in a column for the Wisconsin State Journal. He's a former staffer for that newspaper and is now the executive editor for the Milwaukee Magazine. He spent almost 2 decades in the news business, including working as a copy editor and page designer, managing teams of reporters and editors, and leading award-winning projects, in addition to more than a decade writing about beer.
I saw it for the potential to start writing about something that I was really increasingly starting to get into, and I felt like was something that a lot of people talked about.
In the interview, Drosner discusses the craft of beer review and commentary, the state of craft beer in Wisconsin, and his broader journalism career. I chatted with Drosner last month in his Milwaukee Magazine office in downtown Milwaukee. Here's our chat. How did the beer baron start? What was the origin story of the beer baron?
I've actually been writing about beer for almost a decade before the beer baron, and it was not real professional. And I'm glad that most of it's not on the internet. But I was writing a column called The Brew Guru for the Green Bay Press-Gazette, which I worked for before I came to the State Journal. And it was like an anonymous column written by the Brew Guru, who, instead of like having a column sig where it's my photo and like, smiling like a dork, they had a different celebrity mugshot every week, whenever it ran. And it would say the Brew Guru. So, and this is like 2000, whatever. So it was like Britney Spears. Is Britney Spears the Brew Guru? Is it Keith Richards? Is it? And it ran in the entertainment section of the paper, like the Thursday entertainment section. So, and it was not how I write. But I took it over from another columnist who just got sick of it, I guess. And this was an early, probably 2001, maybe 2002. So it was after the microbrewery boom, but right before like craft beer kind of started really becoming a thing, like a term that people actually used. So, and especially up in Green Bay, it was not really, it was very, very, it was, I feel like I'm part of a niche media market right now, writing about craft beer for a major newspaper. But back then, and in that market, it was even smaller. So it was mostly just making funny jokes and stuff. But, and like the knowledge of like styles and the stuff that like the basics of beer writing that I know about now, and that's part of the column that I do, was just not there. And, so sorry, Green Bay Press-Gazette audience that really wanted serious beer analysis. But I continued to do it, and it got better. And as I kind of educated myself about the topic, and eventually the State Journal, which I had been working for a few years, but freelancing back to the Press-Gazette, and an editor there, the features editor there, was like, "Do you want to write this for us?" And I'm like, "Yes." And that was really when I got the chance to kind of like start doing what I really wanted to do, which was more serious kind of journalism, like actually, talking to people who make the beer, who sell the beer, all that stuff. And, telling the stories of breweries, of brewers, and, going beyond just like, here's a beer, which I still do occasionally, but that was fun.
What did you think when they approached you and they're like, "Hey, you want to write this?" What was like going through your mind?
Well, it was kind of a natural progression. I was like 23 or something on staff, and I had been doing a bar column for a few years. So it was kind of a natural extension of the Club Crawler brand. I mean, it was a quick yes, I saw it for the potential to start writing about something that I was really increasingly starting to get into, and I felt like was something that a lot of people talked about. So it's exciting.
You mentioned off microphone that you're going down to once a month for the Wisconsin State Journal, writing this kind of column. It seems like with the marketplace of craft beer exploding, that there should be more people writing about beer. So, I mean, why aren't there more people? Why aren't there more newspapers writing about this?
Well, I think, like I said, it's a very niche market. I mean, if you look at the sales of craft beer compared to regular beer is not the best barometer for what the audience for this kind of writing is necessarily, but you're looking at like 12% of the beer market is craft beer. And if you slice up your audience by 12% or even 15%, maybe allowing for some differences in the Madison market, it's a niche thing. And in the same way that wine criticism would be, or food is a little bit more universal, but not everybody drinks beer, and that's okay. So, the audience is just a little bit smaller, and I think it's hard to, newspapers are trying to be everything to everybody. That's why I think there's a place for, something like what I do, in really every newspaper. But it sometimes takes some convincing, and you need editors who are recognizing, hey, this is good writing, and it's good storytelling, and it's good journalism, whether or not people are interested in the actual subject matter. And the other thing is, like, increasingly, and Barry Adams has done this since before I started writing about beer, and is continuing to do it now. It's a business story too, and I try not to get too much into that. Sometimes I'll write about the beer industry kind of on the large scale, because I think there's really interesting trends, and and especially when they show up, when they kind of manifest in Madison with, like, all of a sudden Green Flash is gone. Well, what happened? Well, here's the story about the contraction in the national beer market, craft beer market. So that's the kind of thing that I like, kind of pick my spot on and wade into that. But I really don't think readers want to know a lot about breweries' business models a whole lot. I mean, to some degree, if it's really different and interesting, maybe, but I try to kind of keep it more fun. I mean, the beer and the way it tastes and the funny names and its crazy ingredients that are in it, that sort of thing. I think that's more fun.
So what makes a good column then? You kind of talking about it, trying to keep it fun and something that people want to read. To you, what makes a good column for what you're writing?
I think it's the story. Anytime you've got really interesting characters, I mean, when you can build a narrative of it, like where this beer was conceived and developed in interesting ways by interesting people, all that stuff plays into it. To me, I think the most interesting column or story that I've ever told in this column was the story of Pearl Street's Linalool, which is an IPA that was made from hops that, if the story is to be believed, and I have some doubts about exactly how on the nose the story is a little bit. It seems like it's been refined a little bit, but these hops were found growing wild on a farm in Sun Prairie by a guy by a plant biologist who worked at UW, who happened to know what identify them, and knew what they were and knew how to propagate them. And all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but 5 years later, it's a commercial crop that's an exclusive hop that has crazy weird profile compared to almost all the other hops that are in commercial use today, and is a remnant of this historical. It's a historical remnant of this once robust Wisconsin hop industry. So there's so many threads there that are coming together to make it just a really compelling story. And I mean, that's kind of a unicorn of a story. But that was that had everything. And then of course there's the review, which was it's still a singular beer. There's like these kind of green apple, pear, lilac, floral notes in it. It's a really interesting beer.
Well, talk a little bit about how you review beer. I mean, that's can be a challenging thing because people have different tastes. How do you set about doing that in a mass way? So you're connecting with an audience that, might not like this kind of a beer. Like they might not like IPAs, or like, how do you review beers, and make it an interesting thing for somebody to read?
Yeah, this is something that I've really kind of evolved on, over the years. And I do not have a great palate. And I've come to realize this, as far as like the sensitivity to all these really subtle flavors. So what I take kind of a bit more of a blunt instrument approach, I guess. And I mean, I do try to relate, a lot of it is vocabulary and just knowing how to describe what you're tasting. And that just takes practice, and reading a lot of beer criticism, good and bad, helps with that. Particularly the sensory parts. Like there are beer judges who cannot write a lick, but have really well-developed vocabularies to describe what they're tasting and smelling and even feeling. So that's kind of the approach I take is acknowledging that I'm not gonna be a world beater as far as sensing, and reading about the beer when possible. If a brewery has tasting notes in advance of a beer's release, I do look at those. I'm not one who is a purist about having my own experience first. And I think you end up finding new things that maybe are just unique to me, but I think there's an understanding that when you're reading a beer review, that you're reading it through in the context or from the perspective of the writer, and you can't really get away from that. So I think that's kind of my general approach. One other thing that I try to do is acknowledge you mentioned kind of style preferences and that sort of thing. And I kind of try to I'm upfront about that. Like, I don't really care for Hefeweizens. I'll say that when I'm reviewing a Hefeweizen. And when this is one thing about doing it less frequently is I am kind of, I don't have to do that. And that's unfortunate for people who like beers that I'm not really. I mean, I guess I'm saying my own personal preferences do guide the kind of the universe of the column and what I'm writing about and not. But it's not like because I like IPAs, I give every IPA 5-star or whatever. We use mugs, I think. I don't know. Stars. I think it is. I think it's stars. But you have to acknowledge your own personal preferences and try to just account for them. And you're judging a beer against what it's supposed to be. So I know what a Hefeweizen is supposed to taste like and feel like and smell like and look like, and that's kind of the benchmark.
I'm curious if you ever maybe had a conversation with like maybe somebody like Rob Thomas, somebody who like reviews movies and entertainment culture, about how to review things. Have you ever had like a interchange about that?
I talked with Rob about his I ate that column. I like that one because that's kind of like this. I mean, that's actually very similar to the way that I want to describe a beer for people. I mean, is how you feel about it going in is part of it, and if it's this weird, just messed up concept of a food or a beer, then you should talk about that, and that's part of the context of the way that your brain processes all the information that it's getting from your taste buds and your olfactory system and all that stuff. So like the brain, like the brain processes that go along with tasting it doesn't just happen in your mouth; it happens in your head. But yeah, I mean, it's always enjoyable to talk with other kind of. I don't know. I don't like being a critic first. I mean, I'm a journalist and a storyteller first. I kind of see the critical part as secondary. I mean, I want to tell people what's good and what to expect when they try something, but I'd rather tell them that this exists because for this reason.
Going back to some of the things you said there about, your experience of a beer, where you're drinking it, and all these different things can play into it. And I'm wondering if there's ever been a situation where you had a beer and you're like, this is terrible. And then later on you drink it again. You're like, what was I thinking? No, this is actually pretty good.
I find that it usually happens the other way, that there's a beer that's coming out and maybe I'm really excited for it because it's from like a really good brewery and it uses a hop I really like or whatever it is. And I have it in a social context that is really positive. And then I have it again late, and a lot of times it's like the next time you buy it is like when you kind of, I mean, the one that I think of the most when the Mosaic IPAs were just starting to come out. This is maybe 2014, something like that. It was Toppling Goliath Sosis, and I had this beer, and I was like, "Oh my god, this is the best beer I have ever had." And it's still like if people really press me, like usually when they ask for my favorite beer, I'm like, but if I get pressed, usually it's Sosis. And so I had that and I was like, Mosaic single hop. Oh, that's good. And then I had Alchemy Hour. It was called Alchemy Hour at first. And then they changed the name later to Chill Wave from Great Lakes Brewing, which is similar style, double IPA with Mosaic hops. And I put it together that it was the same hop. It wasn't clear. Maybe the Toppling Goliath one didn't list the hops on it or something at the time. But I put it together that it was the same hop that was in these two beers that I loved. I was like, oh my God. And I wrote a column about it. And then like the next year, Chill Wave came out and I was like, oh yes. I'm so excited. I go to drink it and it was good, but it wasn't like, oh my God. I remember going to like Trixie's and all the East Side bottle shops trying to find all the 4-packs I could of that beer. And it just wasn't as good. I asked the Great Lakes rep, I'm like, hey, did they change the recipe on this at all? And it was same deals, fresh seasonal release. So, it's fresh when it comes out. And, he's like, no, it's the same. Why is it different? I'm like, no, probably not. But it's all about, you have an entire year of tasting experiences and probably like 3 or 4 new Mosaic IPAs in between there, right? And I still think that that's a really great beer. And it's not so much because of the Mosaic hops. That's the thing that I really seized on, that as a reason I liked it. But it uses this honey malt that is really, really good. And I later on, I kind of figured out that was one of the factors that I really liked about it too. But, you have this year of tasting experiences and your palate just changes. So that's a major factor. There's a great book by Randy Mosher called Tasting Beer, I believe it's called. And it spends a couple chapters talking about the chemistry and psychology of tasting and all the different factors that go into it and expectations, what you think of something beforehand dramatically affects how good you think it tastes, which says a lot about hype for beer and that sort of thing.
Stepping back a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about the course of craft beer growing in Wisconsin over the last kind of 15 years. When did it become, in your mind, like when did it become like, oh, this is a trend, this is trending, this is like something that's going to be sticking around for a while? When did you kind of realize that?
Well, I always thought that there was going to be more, always being like back in the early 2000s when I was still writing the column in Green Bay, it seemed dramatically under beered, I guess. Even with the really well-established breweries that we had, kind of the legacy craft breweries that we had in Wisconsin, like Lakefront, Sprecher, Capital, those are kind of the OGs here. And then, when I was in Green Bay at the time, so Titletown opened in 1999. That was Hinterland was open. Both of those were kind of like major, just I think it's important. One of the things that I love about the current craft beer boom is that with kind of every town, even the small ones, getting a brewery, is it establishes it as normal and like attainable. So if you live in a city that doesn't have a craft brewery and it's like the size of like Marshfield or something, you might just think that that's not really for you. And I think now every place has one. Little Amory, Wisconsin has one. Like it's clear to everybody that it doesn't have to be. It's not just a bigger city thing. Like your neighborhood can have one. I mean, in Madison, that's becoming the model now. But I guess to answer the question, I think that it seemed to me like it was pretty much a straight line trending upward for the most part until around maybe 2008 or 2009, when it started pointing upward a little bit more sharply, and not just in terms of like the numbers, but the volume and market share. I think everybody kind of became more aware of it. And this is right around the time that I started the column too at the State Journal. That was in 2011. So there was a lot to write about, Yeah. I mean, and the way it's kind of changing now, and the competition's a little bit thicker, and particularly with the really good out of state breweries that are coming in now. Wisconsin had been a market for a long time that was really tough to break into, because we like our own, and because we had, I think, it was tough for a brewery in California or something to kind of put a finger on what we were into. The landscape is a lot different now in terms of what we want and what we're buying. And you see breweries like Prairie, Crooked Stave, these really high end breweries that are competing here. And I mean, I think, Boulevard came back. I think we're going to see Firestone Walker within the next year or so. These are really, really good breweries that make really, really good beers. And I think the competition is starting to kind of shake out in terms of like, are you buying local or are you buying really amazing beer? And it's not that those two are not compatible, but if you're choosing, I mean, state craft brewers will say that their beer stacks up to any other breweries. And that's true to a degree. I mean, but I think when you talk about like Firestone Walker and Pivo Pils, I can't wait for that beer to come here. And I don't think that there's a Pilsner that's made in Wisconsin that's, I don't want to say anywhere close, but that's that level of quality. And I think that you can say that about Sculpin. I think that you can say that about a lot of different styles with, certain beers that are here that weren't here 5 years ago or 10 years ago. You're kind of breaking your customer base down into two groups. Are you the people who are buying local, which is an entirely defensible choice as a consumer. I am choosing to support those near me who I believe share my values in some way, and support my neighbors, that kind of thing. And it's not like you have to sacrifice that much quality to get, for that beer. It's still good beer. And for a large majority of the, consumers, like the difference between a true world-class beer, like a Saison DuPont, and a really good Saison made in Green Bay, Hinterland Saison, one of my favorites. Like there's a difference there, but there's cost factor. There's lots of different factors that go into it. And I'll err on the side of supporting a Wisconsin brewer, yeah. But there are plenty of consumers who are just looking for the best beer, period. And more styles are becoming really well represented by like the best in class that you can get here. And it used to be that those were imports, but now it's all the American styles are coming in too.
So where do you see this kind of shaking out? I mean, there's been a boom. Is there going to be a bust at some point? Is the bubble going to pop on some of these local breweries once there's some more into the marketplace? I guess kind of where do you see the marketplace evolving here in Wisconsin going forward a little bit?
Well, I think the antidote to Pivo Pils, if you're a Wisconsin brewer, is a nicely done German Pilsner that's made 6 blocks away. And I think that's what you're seeing around the country is most of the breweries that are opening. You're not seeing breweries the size of Ale Asylum opening up anymore. And that used to be the case. Like, I mean, Carbon 4 opened literally up in Ale Asylum's old house with, that size of brewing system. That's not happening anymore. And I think I shouldn't say that that's not happening anymore, but it's happening far, far less than it was. But what you're seeing is breweries like Rockhound. You're seeing breweries like Working Draft, although they are moving a lot of beer from what I understand, and it's really good. Giant Jones, a lot of the new ones that are Wright Bauer and Sun Prairie just opened up. These really small taproom breweries that are about the experience. The way I see it, they're almost competing as much with local bars as they are with Sierra Nevada or Lakefront or whatever. It's the way that the pie is being sliced up is just changing. Craft Brewers Association points to that the pie is still growing, and there's still, that growth is slowing down. It's becoming a more mature market. You're going to see business forces, industry forces that were invisible for a long time because the pie was growing so fast. You didn't have to have great business practices to survive, and that's not happening anymore. There are going to be failures. There's going to return to somewhat near a more normal failure rate, which is going to be tough because this is a product that, it is a product from the business standpoint, but from the consumer standpoint, which is always what I'm thinking about when I'm writing about beer, it's something that people have a lot of affinity for. Like, I love my breweries. I love my beer, and I like exploring and trying all the different flavors and all the different styles. And, like you go to a new place. What do? I haven't been here before. I got to go to a brewery and check it out. Right. When you have something that's kind of that, I don't want to romanticize it too much, but something that's that important to you that fails, that's tough. I think that, and obviously that's just from the customer's perspective. I mean, obviously these are entrepreneurs that are putting their money down, obviously, but they're dedicating a big chunk of their life to trying to make a go of this. So it's tough out there. Even the ones that look like they're going great, the numbers the last year and a half or so have not been kind, especially in kind of the middle large tier. I say this a lot, and I should probably say it more often in the column. If you like something, you need to support it. If it's important to have a brewery in Madison like Ale Asylum or Carbon 4, I'm not speaking specifically about them, but those are the size of breweries that are challenged right now because it's harder to sell beer far away. If you appreciate those things, you need to support them.
What do you make of craft beer being kind of a part of the culture wars that we're experiencing right now? I mean, if you look at like Bud Light's advertising campaign, they're basically making fun of people who drink craft beer to sell Bud Light.
Yeah, and they've been doing that for a while too.
Yeah, and then I think just since we're in a political season, you also see like candidates choosing like their favorite beer and to be approachable or to be cool. What do you just make of this whole idea of what craft beer is an identifier and part of this culture war that we're experiencing?
I think it's probably a little ironic. It's kind of I get it because it's when Scott Walker drinks a summer shandy, he knows that everybody in Wisconsin knows summer shandy is from Wisconsin, kind of, at least, or it started here at least. I think summer shandy is made in other Miller Coors plants. A lot of it is made in Chippewa Falls and here and in Milwaukee over on 9th Street, but I do believe that is one of the brands that is made nationwide, or at least in other plants. Anyway, not the point. The point is, like, it could be that he just really likes summer shandy. I'll allow that. I like summer shandy. It's fine. It's not like it's an inconceivable thing. But I think the cynical analysis of that is that he's trying to appeal to a broad segment of a very specific worldview. And I mean, whatever, I guess. I mean, that's fine. But
But doesn't it rankle you every time the Bud Light commercial comes on and they make fun?
Yeah, well, that's not necessarily cultural. That's just business. They're trying to. But it is a divisiveness that's trying to sell beer, kind of mocking the other. Not to get too political about it, but it is also a minority that you're mocking, which I think is part of the reason why it rankles the way it does. I mean, it's kind of funny too, you know. I mean, the great irony of this became a thing a few years ago. There was a Super Bowl ad that Budweiser had where it was like, we're like real beer for real men, kind of was the subtext. And it was a very short bit of this spot where they said, like, flashed I don't even think they said it, but it was like pumpkin peach ale, like mocking, like look at these guys over here. And the beautiful irony of this is that the company that makes Budweiser, Anheuser-Busch, or Anheuser-Busch InBev, which is what it is now, had just bought Elysian Brewing out in Seattle. And ABI has been more aggressive than Miller Coors, at least so far, in buying craft brewers, and not just buying them to add them to the portfolio, which is which Miller Coors has done plenty of. But ABI is buying them and then scaling them up for national audiences. It's why you see Elysian Brewing in Madison now, in Wisconsin. It's why you see 10 Barrel from Oregon. That's an Anheuser-Busch brand. And the list goes on. And there's going to be more soon. But they had just bought Elysian Brewing. This was like a couple weeks before the ad ran. And obviously this was, those are two independent pieces of this huge company doing their own thing. But the dissonant message was that Elysian Brewing famously makes a pumpkin peach ale, exactly the thing that they were mocking. And so it was delicious irony, but a lot of people in kind of the craft beer, like the Twitter sphere, wigged out about it and used it to rail on ABI, which is one of the pastimes of beer Twitter. But there's definitely some, and I think all of this goes back to the point that I made about people really caring about beer, which is in general is a good thing. Obviously, it's the reason I have this job. But people care about it so much that if they feel like they're being slighted because of it, that doesn't feel good, and people fight back.
Tell me more about beer Twitter.
Oh man. Well, here's an example. For the last 2 months or something, beer Twitter has not been able to get away from. Actually, it's I think it started up in the middle of summer. Beer Twitter has not been able to get away from one question, which is it okay for kids to go in brewery tap rooms? And the answer to that is different for us because we're in Wisconsin, and that's just kind of that's part of the deal. But and I don't know where it started, but it's like this really earnest and impassioned debate about why are there children in tap rooms, and there's some really interesting points that get brought up about it. This is the thing that keeps beer Twitter redeeming for me, at least, aside from just being on it for work kind of stuff, is there. I think it was Jeremy Danner who. I mean, I'm pro kid in tap room. I guess I should probably clarify that. But Jeremy Danner, who's with Boulevard in Kansas City, and probably is the prince of beer Twitter, if not the king. He made some really good points about this is here, all these reasons why. And one of the really good ones was if you do it in a responsible way, and you're that, which is kind of the critical piece of context for the entire discussion of this. If you're rogue bands of kids running around tap rooms and stealing beers from people and drinking them and knocking people over and being loud and rowdy, that's, nobody wants that. But part of the responsibility aspect of it is socialize them about alcohol. Show them that it's not something to be binged or something to be, it's not a taboo. Like, this is okay. Like, my stepson's 8, and we've developed this little ritual where not every time, but often when I bring out a beer, he's like, "Oh, let me sniff that." And he'll give a thumbs up or thumbs down. And I'll ask him, and sometimes I'll ask him, like, what do you smell? Why do you like that? He's like, "It smells like fruit." I'm like, "Yeah, it does. That's a really fruity IPA. Nice job." So, but I think, like, educating, like, show them that it's okay to, like, use alcohol responsibly. And that's what is happening in 99.5% of brewery tap rooms. Model that behavior. So that's beer Twitter. I mean, like, but there's so many kind of, like, I mean, it's Twitter. That's what Twitter is, right? It's just people yelling at each other. And these people are just yelling about beer. That's kind of the main thing.
What's the most interesting thing happening in Wisconsin beer right now, craft beer? What's the most kind of innovative or interesting things that you're kind of tracking?
Because of the audience that I'm writing for, which is a pretty general audience, I spend a lot more time probably than some readers might prefer talking about the kind of bigger statewide breweries. Most of the reviews that I write about are not, small taproom beers. They're because I want to talk about something that you can just go to the grocery store and get. So there's an accessibility factor there. I mention that because that's the perspective that I'm kind of coming from here. But one of the things that I find really interesting is how those kind of larger legacy breweries are adapting to kind of the new world. I think of Central Waters with this. Central Waters is in a really great spot because their barrel aging, their barrel aged beer program is enormous and was a pioneer here in that, and really nationally in terms of the scale that they do it at. To be able to walk into a store and be able to pick out one of 4 or 5 or 6 different barrel aged beers from one brewery is pretty crazy, considering that like, and I'm not talking about like just like one store, but like, grocery stores. So watching them evolve, and they just came out with a beer called Unsettled, not just, but I think it was in October. It's a hazy IPA, New England IPA, and it was among the finalists at the Wisconsin IPA Festival that I was a judge for back in August. And the version that they canned and came out with in October is significantly better than the version that I tried back in August. So, I mean, which is to say that it's very, very good, and it's in a new school way that. It's not that you didn't think that Central Waters had it in them to brew a beer like this, but they're not really trend chasers. I mean, their trend chase is the wrong word, and follow makes it sound like they're not leading, which is not true either. But I mean, Cassian Sunset, which is a vanilla, coffee, cinnamon barrel aged imperial stout, came out 3 years ago, and that profile of the kind of sweet vanilla adjunct, like all of that is all the rage right now. So they're right there with all these trends. I'm not saying that they're making them, but they're right there with them. Maple is another big trend right now in that kind of dark beer space, and they're right there with that too. I think they're going to have a maple bourbon barrel stout that's going to be in 4-packs might be even this year yet or early next year. So like watching them kind of evolve and stay contemporary has been really, really fun. And not just them, but I mean, there's other breweries as well.
One of the things I think something people find really interesting about their local brewery or breweries, that everybody's like, I would love to work for a brewery or whatever it is. They get to make beer and be around beer all the time. But I'm kind of wondering, you've talked, I'm sure, to a lot of brewers and a lot of people who own these places. What are they like culturally, and like, why are they successful? Like, why is Central Waters successful? Because they try a lot of things? I mean, because I don't know, like, why Why did they succeed or not succeed? What's kind of the culture of these places?
That's a great question. Why is a brewery successful? I mean, I think I think it's kind of three things. Like, one is just the beer. Like, is the beer good? Because if the beer is bad, you're screwed. If the beer is okay, you got to have the other two things that I'm going to talk about be really strong. So that's one thing. And I think maybe not even these days, but you can probably get by with just great beer if the other two things are like subpar, below average at least. And the other two things are business plan, just like the internal stuff that we don't know about. I probably don't know about them like in detail, even because nobody's talking about their capital expense. I don't know what I'm just making up business terms, but
spreadsheets.
Yeah. Stuff, all that stuff. That stuff is extremely important. The ability because that allows you to pay your employees better, which is a big issue in the brewing industry. Low pay, because it's an awesome job. Like, I mean, it's not an awesome job in a lot of ways, but you get to work at a brewery, and ultimately that's pretty fun. So I don't think it's a if this then that kind of direct thing, but people think, well, I'm willing to take less pay because it's fun. And then the other thing is marketing and branding and all that stuff. I find that there are a lot of purist brewers who just loathe that part of the business, which is why I like the Deb and Dan Carey model of Deb is a businesswoman and a marketer and a branding person, I guess. Like, she does all the drawings. This is the Careys from New Glarus. And then Dan's like a master brewer who's like, you do the business, I'm just going to make all this beer. That duality is something that I see a lot in successful breweries. Is they've got a business person or a money person and a great beer person, and they work together, and they understand each other enough, or just stay out of each other's way enough to make it work. The team at Carbon 4 is one that I've got to know really well, because they started when I was already kind of a thing here, and I know all four of those guys, and what they all bring to the table is so distinct and kind of unique, and they're all friends from back in the day. So if that works well, or if a brewery works well, usually there's those kind of three things meshing together. And the guys at Carbon 4, I think, are really good at that. I mean, the Fantasy Factory. I mean, what a great brand. Something that they started as a seasonal, like one of 5 beers that they had or something. And it was so good that they just had to keep making it. And I think some beer drinkers think that they're being dictated to a lot more than by the brewer. And they have this dictate a very German, influenced, and it's like, no, we're making, if you buy it, we're going to make it again, that's pretty simple. Dan Carey, Dan is the one that I always kind of thought like, oh, he's kind of and he operates kind of out of view mostly, but if you ask him like, what's your plan? Well, we're going to make whatever people want to buy. And it's like, okay, because I mean, New Glarus has so many beers that they make on a regular basis, and they rotate them out. And they bring certain ones back more often than others, and beers get demoted from seasonals to kind of, like less than seasonal. We saw that with Fat Squirrel, where it's back now, but it wasn't a fall seasonal last year. Everybody kind of freaked out. So I find that like interesting. That it's like, no, if you buy it and buy it quickly, we're gonna keep making it.
One of the things I hear a lot of my Wisconsin craft beer enthusiasts or snobs or whatever you want to call them say about New Glarus is, well, they don't hate New Glarus for, but they always hate when people say my favorite craft beer is Spotted Cow. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've heard that as well, or any comment.
I'll tell you who really hates that is Dan Carey. Oh man, like the notion of Spotted Cow as like a lowbrow, like a step up from Miller Lite. We talked about this at length when they first came out with the Spotted Cow Grand Cru, which is like a imperial kind of Belgian vitified version of Spotted Cow. Very good.
Mm-hmm.
But he looks at the quality of the ingredients that go into it and the techniques that he uses. Obviously he's a pretty rigorous brewer, and he just he does not like it when people refer to like Spotted Cow as like a gateway beer, like the notion that you have to move beyond Spotted Cow once your palate develops or something. To some degree, he's right. And I think that's why he made the Grand Cru beer, because it takes all of what Spotted Cow does and it kind of turns the volume up to imperial levels, so you can't ignore it, because it's a pretty subtle beer. Like, it's delicate, light hops, kind of that graininess. I mean, I understand why people kind of rag on it, because it's closer in flavor to other kind of macro beers, probably. Maybe, I don't know. He'd probably get mad if he heard that. But I mean, from most beer consumers, where most people's palates are at, I think that's mostly true. But I'm sorry, what was the question?
I don't know if it was a really good question. It was just basically
no, it was.
Like people look down on people who kind of like are using Spotted Cow as the gateway or the thing that's like their favorite craft beer.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's a perception that it's like, oh, you must not have tried. Like, if you see somebody drinking a Spotted Cow, you're kind of like, oh, like, so you're kind of into craft beer, but not really. Right. Have you tried this pale ale, or have you tried this brown ale? It's like, Doppelbock? No, you don't like those things. Okay. Oh, you drink Spotted Cow because you like Spotted Cow. Okay, I got it. Not because you haven't figured everything else out yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I see Dan's point, but I also see, like, I don't drink a lot of Spotted Cow right now. Unless I'm at a wedding, and that's what there is.
Right. I want to start talking a little bit about your journalism career a little bit besides beer. You said there's more to it than beer.
Yes, there is.
But maybe you want to give a few just like beers that are maybe in your fridge right now that you're just kind of obsessed with, any kind of Wisconsin beers that people need to go out and get.
Yeah, well, I already mentioned one, Unsettled, from Central Waters. It's a New England IPA. It's very good. And it does what that style should do without doing some of the things that style often does that's gross. It's hazy, but not soupy. It's super aromatic, but not like hot. There's like, I haven't really tried to, I haven't vocabularized this part of it, but there's like this kind of, it's almost like an alcohol hotness, but it's not from that. It's from hop oils, or I don't know what it is. I don't know what it's from, but I know it when I smell it, and this doesn't have that. So that's a good one. Not to just keep talking about New Glarus, but that's chocolate stout that they just came out with is amazing. I just kind of leaned back and did looked at the ceiling like I'm in modest amount of ecstasy, because if you like chocolate, like, sometimes chocolate stouts are like bitter because, you're using dark, like cacao nibs are not like sweet, but this is like it's a milk stout. So it's very kind of sweet and creamy. And the chocolate is like milk chocolate, not like dark chocolate. It's very, very good. If you like that kind of thing. I don't know why you wouldn't, because chocolate's awesome. Let's see. One of the newer breweries here in Milwaukee is called Venture Brew Co., and it's a combination coffee house and brewery, and they have been making a lot of really good beers. But my favorite is called The Heights, and it's a saison. It's in the Washington Heights neighborhood, which is right on the western edge of Milwaukee, just a couple blocks from Wauwatosa, and it's a very interesting kind of mixed, diverse neighborhood, and they have been going gangbusters there. And you go there and you don't see the usual taproom crowd, probably because of the coffee, I guess. But there's glasses of beer in front of on all these tables too. It feels like they're very neighborhood focused, and they're just hitting exactly what they wanted to do in that regard. And the Heights is an allusion to the neighborhood, and it's a great saison, dry, light grain, good hop character. It's just a beautiful saison, which is a beautiful style. So when that's done well, yeah, I could go on, but that's probably a good amount.
There's some good holiday gifts there, maybe for some people.
Yeah, and Venture, obviously, I should qualify that they only serve on site. They might send a few kegs around town a little bit, but you have to pick up a couple crawlers.
So now going back to journalism career, you went to the UW, right? You went to UW-Madison.
Yes.
For college. I guess at some point you determined that you wanted to be a journalist.
I did.
So what was kind of your path from journalism school to, Green Bay Press-Gazette, then to the Wisconsin State Journal? When you started out, what'd you want to do, and kind of what was that path?
Well, I started out reading newspapers on the floor of the family home in Green Bay, mostly box scores, baseball box scores. I loved baseball statistics, and I guess I eventually started noticing the writing that was next to it. I kind of wanted to be a sports writer, and I was always interested in writing throughout high school and stuff. But once I kind of crapped out on the idea of pursuing an architecture career, I decided that I was I like telling stories. I always have, and writing and journalism seemed to be kind of a path to that. I went to UW and enrolled in the journalism school and started writing at the Daily Cardinal. Go Daily Cardinal. And which is a daily newspaper. At the time, I don't think either of the campus dailies are daily anymore, but they still do daily. I mean, they still put out multiple papers a week, and there's still that really good journalism laboratory kind of learning environment there. But I was managing editor and just managing editor at the Cardinal, and I really liked kind of doing all the stuff. I was not great at reporting. It was very difficult. And part of it was you're making calls to sources and you have to wait for them to call you back. And I didn't like being kind of dependent on that for nailing the story that you think you've got. So when it came time to go pro, I took a job up at the Press-Gazette as a copy editor and page designer, because I got kind of comfortable with all those tools and that aspect of the production process. And I was an okay designer, I guess. And that was my way into the newsroom. And I stayed there through. I was a copy editor and page designer when I was hired at the State Journal in 2005. It wasn't until 2011 that I became a signing editor, where I was working with reporters. It was a little awkward because they asked me "Hey, we think you should do this," and I was like, "Okay." That I've never reported professionally before, right? And I'm going to be managing people who have been reporting professionally for longer than I've been alive. And they said, yeah, you'll be fine. And they were right. But it's such a, I feel like right now, anytime a journalist is talking about their own career, they have to mention how important it is, because in this time, because some of the stuff that we're seeing right now in various halls of power is journalism is important. It's important that people know about that stuff that's happening. I'll just say that.
Well, I think maybe one of the major things that happened during your career, especially when you're at the Wisconsin State Journal, was the 2011 Capitol protests that I think everybody remembers. Governor Scott Walker's collective bargaining restrictions put into place. You were kind of in the center of the newsroom when all this was happening. What was the experience like, kind of being a part of that team, which was not, recognized as a Pulitzer finalist?
Yeah, that was some of the most. That was for a pretty sustained period, some of the most intense journalism that I've been around. And it was what was interesting about it is at the time I was still on the copy desk, I believe. I was designing the pages and and working with that. But I'd already done a stint on the city desk, so I was kind of in between. And but mostly I was seeing everything come together at night. And journalists are dedicated all the time, but when something is big is going on and there's this community imperative to tell that story, whether it's like you see it when there's a tornado. I remember that was another big one, was the tornado in Stoughton in 2007, I think. Or the big floods in when Lake Delton broke and when it went away. All of that, there's like this mobilization and all hands on deck kind of mentality where everybody's doing whatever they can to help. And seeing that play out in kind of two arenas. One was like the actual legislative arena, which was a zoo at the time. I mean, you have to remember, like, there were senators who like fled the state. It was crazy just following that part of it. And then the context of all the protests and what was happening at the Capitol and the kind of sanctity with which the crowds were treating their right to be in the Capitol and the questions about that. And it was absolutely remarkable. And I'll never forget Sandy Cullen is a name that you probably don't see in the State Journal a whole lot, but she's an assistant city editor, and for the most part, she's our night city editor, meaning she's working, taking late stories and making sure they get in the paper, assigning, our usually very young night reporters to go chase a story if there's a shooting or whatever it is. She was down at the Capitol, and I remember her hearing her calls. It was when the crowd was like banging on the doors. She's like right there, and she's dictating quotes like squished up between the doors. I mean, she was right there. And I mean, that's just one example of but there were dozens of probably dozens. There's probably 20 people involved in various parts of just news gathering, especially in those first couple of days. It's this dynamic and just like kinetic feeling when there's so much going on, and that every word is going to be read. Sometimes if you're just like, Monday school board story, it's like, man, this is boring. But that everybody in the city is going to read every word on that page. And you've got 4 pages of them, 4 complete, like, open pages. It was remarkable. And obviously just the online, storytelling that we were doing too was a big part of the Pulitzer thing too. So yeah, I'm really proud of that. And it shaped my kind of like perspective on my career for a long time.
It's been about almost 8 years since that time, and we're kind of at this end of Scott Walker's administration. He's still young. We never know if he'll come back into Wisconsin politics at some point. But the era of Scott Walker is basically closing right now, the current era anyway. And I'm wondering what you just think about Scott Walker leaving, the legacy of that time. What do you think back on, 8 years later? What kind of impact did it had on Wisconsin?
I think those stories have been told, I guess. I don't have any particular thoughts on this. This is going to be where I'll talk about my opinions on beer things a lot, but, it was a pretty intense 8 years of 8 years of governorship. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how much of that can be even reversed. I mean, obviously it's not clear to me exactly what Evers is going to want to, walk back, and even less clear what his ability to do so will be, with a Republican legislature still. But it was one story after another for a while of pretty significant changes to environmental regulations, state funding priorities, landlord tenant laws. I mean, all that stuff. There was kind of story fatigue, and you see this with the Trump administration now. Like, there's so many stories that are just kind of flying under the radar because there's an outrage fatigue of, wait, can you really do that? That kind of thing. And I think there's probably a lot of stuff that's happened in the last 2 years. There's probably more stuff that's happened in the last 2 years in Washington. The significant impacts in the last 8 years, here in Wisconsin, which isn't to say that those 8 years was not, didn't have a lot of impact, because obviously they did. That's kind of where I started this whole thread. But
yeah, I didn't mean to turn the conversation too political or anything, but speaking of all the things that, this kind of cavalcade of things that are happening, and the importance of journalism, and I'm wondering how you feel about the state journal's ability and the press's ability, giving staffing shortages, to be able to cover all these things and make these things impactful to people that they actually read and can digest and kind of understand what's going on.
Yeah. That's obviously a concern. The media landscape is not real good right now financially. I left the State Journal a little bit more than a year ago, and my separation was not voluntary. And there was some context there that I think, the commute from Milwaukee was starting to drag a little bit. I think we'll leave it at that. But at the same time, there were two other journalists who are no longer, their positions were removed from the State Journal newsroom. So, every one of those, I've been in journalism since 1999, and that first year, 2000, was my first round of layoffs. So I've been seeing this, be whittled away for 18 years. And it's tough as somebody in that industry. Like, you just kind of flinch a lot at these kinds of financial reports. And, you hear about another round of layoffs in North Carolina or Gannett or, whatever it is. And you just know that it's the reality of the situation, and or you accept maybe that it's the reality of the situation, and you kind of get a little shell shocked. And everybody knows that it's not an easy business to be in. I feel really lucky that I'm still in journalism, honestly, because most of the people who are separated from the industry at that time, they go the PR route, and especially in Madison, like there's a lot of PR demand, and it makes me wonder, like, at some point, who are you talking to? University, hospitals, whatever. Like, there's fewer and fewer journalists to kind of pitch those stories at, and I understand that that's not all they do, but yeah, it's tough to watch, but you have to end on a positive note with this, because the quality of people who are in journalism is still really high. I see, here at Milwaukee Magazine and at the State Journal, we would see new young, interns come through every semester, and they were really good. They're really good. And, like they're in it for the right reasons. They have a sense of the craft that is far beyond my ability to do, just the technical and multimedia, multi-platform, all that stuff. It's just what they've grown up with. And we teach them how to write stories and report stories and how to get the really good stuff. And there's so many great journalists still working who, especially at the State Journal. That's a really good newsroom in there. So it's in good hands. I wish it would have been more hands, obviously, but it's in good hands.
Good. Oh, I'm glad to hear that. I want to ask a little bit about Milwaukee Magazine. So that you've kind of landed here. Tell me about the magazine and what you hope it will be over the next few years here.
This is kind of an interesting spot for me now. I've learned a lot in the last year, that's for sure. So we're a city magazine, obviously, which is kind of its own class of magazines, and it's kind of straddles the line between journalism and more kind of lifestyle, like, kind of what you tend to think about magazines as, like, with style and all the kind of stuff that nationally, like national magazines like that are really having a tough time. But because we are covering a community like a newspaper does, there's a essential function there that is helping this category at least weather some of the audience dynamics, we'll call it, a little bit better than the national magazines. And it's journalism. Like, that's the thing that I am really excited about. We only publish once a month, obviously, whereas I'm used to publishing 30 days a month, or had been used to that. But we can, I don't have to worry about those Monday night school board stories anymore. And we get to pick our spots on what we think is really going to shape the community and have a really positive impact. We are a little bit of, we're cheerleaders for this community because we love it, but that doesn't mean that we're not willing to shine a harsh light on some of its problems. And, taking that journalistic approach to a story that can be 8 magazine pages long, not that length is everything, but the level of detail and, commitment of resources is really, really, it's been really satisfying. Some of the stories that I've worked on, even just in this first year, I've got a stack of magazines over there that I'm kind of going through, and just to kind of review for our annual award submissions to the City and Regional Magazine Association. So it's like reflecting on kind of what we've done. And there's a lot of really good stuff in there, and stuff that I'm really proud of that I worked on, and stuff that I'm really proud of that I didn't directly work on, that we just hit home runs with. So, and the business is okay. I know enough about that to say that, we're doing okay. And I feel confident that we'll be here doing what we're doing for a long time.
Yeah, I've always thought that there's a power in sometimes doing less, in the sense that you get to focus. And when you go from a daily to a monthly, there's a lot more focus on small things. You find that as well?
Yeah. I would be real cautious about that comparison between newspapers and magazines, though, because the mission is just so different. We're taking big swings with our big stories because that's what we must do. We don't have to cover the school board story because somebody else is doing that.
Right. And
nobody expects us to. For a newspaper, the reason you're at that boring school board story is because maybe there's something, or that boring school board meeting, maybe something really crazy happens and you need to be there to report it. Mm-hmm. And if we're not there, if the newspaper's not there, that story might not be told. So there's a big difference in mission there. And if the Journal Sentinel stops covering things, we're not really in a position to step in and say, well, we're going to go to the school board meeting.
It's an ecosystem of media.
Yeah, right.
Anything else you're excited about here? Anything?
There's a brewery that just opened up today.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, in Tosa, actually, where I live. It's the brewery that will be, I think it's closest. No, not quite. Big Head is still closer to my house, but it's a brewery called Stockhouse. I think they've got a 1-barrel system or a 3-barrel system, maybe. They literally just opened tonight, so I don't know if I'm going to go by there. Maybe not this week for sure.
So does everybody know when Chris is in the building? Or does the Beer Baron moniker like follow you around, or do people know who you are?
Some people. I talk to I try to talk to as many of the brewery owners as I can, and so they know me. I'm not like our dining critic, Ann Christensen. There's actually a story in our December issue about her. It's our best restaurants issue. So it's her kind of picks of the best best restaurants that have opened in the last year or so. And we decided to do a profile on her because she's been reviewing restaurants here for 23 years, which is like a really long time in this business. she's kind of an institution. And it's when we bring groups through here, there was a group of UW students actually last week. They all want to stop and talk to Anne because it's such an interesting job. So we kind of took that approach and did a little profile on Anne. And the reason I bring this up is because it's interesting because she's anonymous. None of her sources, and she's very well sourced in the industry. None of them know who she is. I mean, what she looks like. Well, at least she seems to think that most of them don't. And of course the point is that she gets the same kind of treatment as you or I would if we went into whatever restaurant. So that's kind of interesting too. So all these things kind of together, we decided it would be interesting to do a profile on her. I don't bother with that because, I mean, obviously my picture's in the paper next to with my columns. And it's a little different. I mean, it's more of a traditional column more than a critique type thing. So I try to fend off the free beers as much as I can.
Yeah, I imagine everybody. This is Wisconsin, so everybody is going to want to buy you a beer.
Yeah, that's right? That's just the currency of the beer industry too. Is, I mean, man, I still think one of the main reasons why like session beers and like low alcohol lagers and that kind of stuff is kind of a thing in brewing is because brewers need them because or sales reps. I mean, it's just kind of the social. It's like the handshake, you know, you have a beer with your client or whatever. So they're making session IPAs so that they can drink an IPA and not be housed at the end of the day.
So what's you kind of scaled back a little bit of like how often your columns appearing. What is the future of your beer writing? Do you want to keep doing it? What's kind of the
I mean, you know, one of the reasons I kind of scaled back on it a little bit was to kind of pick our spots a little bit better. I mean, part of it is I'm in Milwaukee. I'm not in Madison as often as I'd like. So much of what's happening as far as like the beer news is small breweries, new breweries, tap rooms, that sort of thing. And I wish that I could do more with that, but I can't. So instead of having it be the new beer of every other week or every week, like it was for a while, we're just going to be kind of picking spots and doing more trend stories, kind of bigger picture stuff. So, I mean, like the last one we did was for October was a profile on the Lakefront My Turn series, which is a story that I've been wanting to do for a long time because I just think it's one of the coolest things in Wisconsin beer. And, you know, they let different employees in all parts of the brewery basically make a beer. And they brew it on their big system and they send it out in 6-packs. And I mean, they pick the colors, the whole deal. The reason I think it's just so genius is Lakefront, you know, before My Turn was thought of as, I mean, they had, it's a primarily German style brewery. Lots of, you know, River West Stein, really good Pilsner, a lot of traditional styles, kind of an older school IPA. What this has let them do is make a spiced winter Doppelbock. It's let them make a Mexican lager, a Mexican ale. It's let them make a Kolsch. It's let them make all these different beers that have been really good. I mean, and I think like somebody looking at Lakefront's portfolio now versus when they started My Turn would kind of be like, well, they make all kinds of different, you know, like they came out with porter for their winter seasonal this year. It's like, that's not all that weird. that doesn't really fit with what their kind of profile had been. But I think a lot of that has evolved from the success of My Turn and recognizing that they don't have to be in this little box of like lagers and Dunkel, you know, Eastside Dark and River West Stein and all those. I guess the point being, back to the question. Sorry, this is how I work. That story was like the main story on the taste page. So, you know, the stories are getting a little bit more play. I've never been shy about writing long, so I don't think I'm gonna. They've never asked me to cut half of my story, so you know, I don't think it's not necessarily going to be more in depth, but it's going to be kind of the story selection is going to be a little bit tighter, a little bit more curated, and hopefully better.
It was a pleasure to meet Chris. I hope to have a beer with him at some point. I love his passion for his interests. Make sure to subscribe to the Wisconsin Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play. Also, stay in the loop about the pod by visiting wispod.com and following the show on Twitter at wispodcast and on Facebook at the Wisconsin Podcast. Cheers.